The desert sun blazed merciless overhead as Mara Lane crouched behind the scrub brush naked, except for torn fragments of fabric clutched against her chest. Blood traced down her bare foot from a mesquite thorn, embedded deep in her heel, but she didn't dare move. Hoofbeats thundered closer. "No, don't look, please," she whispered, voice cracking with shame and terror. The rancher's silhouette appeared over the ridge, and he froze, not in judgment, but in horror at what he was witnessing. This is her story. Follow it to the end and comment with your city so I can see how far this journey reaches across the world. The morning had started 3 hours earlier with Victor's fist. Mara had burned the eggs just slightly brown at the edges, nothing a man with patience couldn't overlook. But Victor Lane had never possessed patience, only possession. The cast iron skillet had barely touched the kitchen table before his hand connected with her cheekbone, the crack echoing through their small ranch house like a rifle shot. "You stupid, worthless—" His words dissolved into animal rage as he grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back until her neck screamed in protest. This wasn't new. The bruises layered on her ribs told stories in purple and yellow, a timeline of degradation she'd learned to hide beneath long sleeves and forced smiles. But something in Mara's chest had finally broken that morning, not her spirit, but the lock that had kept her caged. When Victor stormed out to check the fence line, leaving her crumpled on the kitchen floor, Mara made a choice. She didn't pack. She didn't plan. She just ran. The screen door slammed behind her as she burst into the brutal New Mexico heat, barefoot and wearing only the thin cotton nightdress that Victor had half torn from her shoulders during his rage. The fabric hung in shreds, exposing skin that bore the map of her marriage handprints, belt marks, the savage geography of abuse. Behind her, she heard Victor's truck roar to life. He'd seen her. Mini-climax number 1. Mara's bare feet hit the sun-baked earth at a dead sprint, each step against the scorched ground sending shocks of pain through her legs. But fear drove her faster than agony ever could. The mesquite and creosote blurred past as she ran without direction, only away, always away from the man whose love had curdled into ownership. The truck's engine grew louder. Victor was coming. She veered off the dirt road into the open desert where his truck couldn't follow. Rocks and thorns shredded her feet, but she couldn't stop. A barbed wire fence appeared ahead, someone's property line. She didn't hesitate, just ducked and rolled beneath it, felt the barbs catch and tear what remained of her nightdress. Mini-climax number 2. A mesquite thorn thick as a nail punched through the soft arch of her left foot as she landed on the other side of the fence. The pain was white-hot, blinding, and Mara's scream died in her throat as she bit down hard enough to taste copper. She yanked the thorn free with trembling fingers, blood immediately pooling in the sand beneath her. Behind her, Victor's voice carried across the desert like thunder. "Mara, get back here, you ungrateful bitch!" She crawled forward on hands and knees, the torn nightdress now barely covering her at all, leaving her exposed to the merciless sun and her husband's hunting rage. The scrub brush ahead offered the only cover for miles. Mara dragged herself behind it, pressing her near-naked body against the thorny branches, not caring that they scratched and bit into her already wounded skin. She grabbed handfuls of leaves, pressing them against her chest in a pathetic attempt at modesty. This was it. This was how she'd be found beaten, bleeding naked and broken in the desert. The hoofbeats started as a distant rhythm growing steadily closer. Not a truck this time. A horse. Mini-climax number 3. Mara's entire body locked in terror as the rider approached. Every instinct screamed at her to run again, but her torn feet wouldn't carry her another step. She'd left blood trails in the sand. There was no hiding now. Through the gaps in the scrub brush, she saw the horse's legs, then the rider's boots as he dismounted. Heavy, work-worn boots. Not Victor's expensive ranch wear. Someone else had found her. "No, don't look, please." She whispered the words, barely audible even to herself. The footsteps stopped. "Ma'am." The voice was older, rough, with decades of desert wind, but gentler than any she'd heard in years. "Ma'am, I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Eli Hart. That's my ranch you're on." Mara couldn't respond. Shame flooded her more completely than fear ever had. Shame at being seen like this, at being reduced to this cowering naked creature in the dirt. "I'm going to step back to my horse." Eli continued, his voice steady and unhurried. "I'm getting my shirt. I'm not coming any closer until you say it's okay." Mini climax number 4. She heard him move away, heard the soft sound of fabric rustling. Then his hand appeared around the edge of the brush, just his hand, weathered and scarred from some ranch work, holding a faded blue work shirt. The hand was empty of threat, open offering, without demanding. "Here," Eli said quietly. "Take this. Cover yourself. You're safe now. I promise you, you're safe." The word safe broke something in Mara. A sob tore from her throat as she snatched the shirt with shaking hands and wrapped it around herself. It was too big, swallowing her small frame, but it was clean, and it smelled like honest sweat and hay, not violence and whiskey. "Okay," she finally managed, voice hoarse. "Okay." Eli moved back into view then, and Mara saw him fully for the first time. He was older, 50-something maybe, with silver threading through dark hair and lines carved deep around eyes that had seen both hard work and harder losses. But those eyes held no judgment, no lust, no anger, only concern. He took in her injuries with one sweeping glance, the bruises, the bleeding feet, the way she trembled like a wounded animal, and his jaw tightened, not with rage at her, but for her. "Who did this to you?" His voice had gone quiet, deadly quiet. Mini climax number 5. Mara's next choice would define everything. She could lie, could protect Victor out of habit, and fear could claim she'd fallen or been in an accident like she'd told the grocery clerk a dozen times before, or she could speak the truth that had been trapped in her throat for 3 years of hell. "My husband," she whispered. "Victor Lane. He's looking for me." The name registered in Eli's expression, a flicker of recognition. Lane. The property 6 miles east. Yes. The word was barely a breath. Eli crouched down, careful to keep distance between them, hands visible and non-threatening. "Listen to me carefully. You've got a choice here, and it's your choice, not mine. I can take you to the sheriff right now, or I can take you to the clinic, or you can come to my house. We can get you cleaned up and safe, and then we decide next steps together. But here's what I won't do. I won't let him find you out here like this. I won't leave you alone. What do you need?" The question, "What do you need?" stunned her. When was the last time anyone had asked her that? I can't think," Mara stammered. "That's the heat and shock talking. Let me make one decision for you, just this one. I'm getting you out of this sun before you collapse. Everything else we'll figure out together. Can you walk?" Mini climax number 6. Mara tried to stand, but the moment weight touched her shredded feet, her legs buckled. Eli caught her before she hit the ground, his arms steady, but his grip loose enough that she could pull away if she wanted to. "I've got you," he said. "I need to lift you. I'll carry you to my horse. Tell me if that's not okay." The fact that he asked, that he waited for her nod, before gathering her into his arms, made tears stream down Mara's face. He lifted her as carefully as he might lift something precious and broken, settling her sideways across his saddle before mounting behind her. As they rode toward his ranch house, visible in the distance, Mara allowed herself to collapse against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat through the borrowed shirt. For the first time in 3 years, someone's touch didn't make her flinch. The ranch house materialized out of the heat shimmer, a modest, well-maintained building with a wraparound porch and clean white paint. Eli guided the horse to the front steps and dismounted, then reached up to help Mara down. "Porch first," he said. "Water, shade, and we'll look at those feet." Mini climax number 7. He settled her into a rocking chair on the porch, disappeared inside, and returned with a pitcher of cold water, a glass, and a first aid kit that had clearly seen considerable use. Mara drank like she'd crossed the Sahara, not caring that water spilled down her chin. Eli crouched in front of her, examining her feet with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd treated livestock injuries for decades. "This is bad, but I've seen worse," he said, cleaning the puncture wounds with steady hands. "The bleeding's already slowing. You'll need real medical attention, but this'll hold you for now." As he worked, Mara studied him. His movements were deliberate, never rushed, never rough. When his fingers had to probe a particularly deep cut, he warned her first. "This'll hurt. Count of 3. Why are you helping me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Eli paused, meeting her eyes. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because I've got a daughter somewhere out there, haven't seen her in years, and I'd hope someone would do the same for her if she needed it." His voice roughened. "And because no man worth the name does what was done to you." Mini climax number 8. Mara's walls cracked further. He'll come looking. Victor doesn't let go of what's his. Her voice broke. "He'll say terrible things about me. He'll make the whole town believe She couldn't finish. "Then we'll tell the truth louder than he can tell lies," Eli said, simply wrapping the last bandage around her foot. "But first, you need rest food and clean clothes. The truth can wait until you're ready to speak it." He stood, offering his hand. "Guest room's made up. Used to be my daughter's. You'll have a lock on the door, and I sleep on the opposite side of the house. You're not a prisoner here. You can leave any time you want. But I'd appreciate it if you'd stay long enough to heal." Mara took his hand, let him help her inside. The house was clean, but lived in with the sparse functionality of a man who'd long ago stopped decorating and started merely existing. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a quilt on the bed and curtains that actually worked. "Bathroom's there," Eli pointed. "There's soap towels, some old clothes of Sarah's, my daughter's, in the closet. They might fit. Take your time. I'll make something to eat." Mini climax number 9. Alone for the first time in hours, Mara locked the door and slumped against it, sliding down to the floor. The borrowed shirt fell open, and she finally looked at herself. Really looked. The bruises formed a constellation of abuse across her ribcage, fingerprints on her upper arms, the split lip she'd almost forgotten about. She looked like evidence. She was evidence. The shower hurt water, finding every cut and scrape, but it also washed away layers of shame and dirt and Victor's touch. She scrubbed until her skin was pink and raw, until the water ran clear instead of rust-colored from dried blood and desert dust. In the closet, she found jeans and a soft flannel shirt that fit reasonably well. Sarah Hart, whoever she was, had been about Mara's size. As she dressed in another woman's clothes in another man's house, Mara felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of a different life. When she emerged, Eli had set food on the kitchen table. Nothing fancy, just eggs, perfectly cooked, toast, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. "Eat what you can," he said, not hovering, not watching her like Victor always had, monitoring every bite for imperfection. Mara ate, and as she ate, she talked. Mini climax number 10. The words came slowly at first, then in a flood. 3 years of escalating violence, of isolation from friends and family, of being told she was worthless, stupid, lucky that anyone would want her. Victor's jealous rages over imagined infidelities, the times he'd locked her in the bedroom for days, the night he'd broken her arm and then driven her to a clinic 3 towns over where no one would ask questions. Eli listened without interrupting, his face growing progressively grimmer, but his voice remaining gentle when he finally spoke. "You survived. That took strength most people don't have. And now we make sure you stay surviving." He laid out options like a man presenting tools, letting her choose which to use. "We can go to Sheriff Ruth Calder. She's fair tough. won't dismiss this, but we'll need evidence beyond your word against his. Medical examination photographs of injuries written, statement with dates and details. Or we can lay low here while we gather that evidence privately, then present it all at once so he can't run interference. He's already running interference, Mara said bitterly. He knows everyone. He'll paint me as crazy, unfaithful, a liar. Then we make sure the evidence is ironclad. Eli cut in. Facts don't care about reputation. Mini-climax number 11. Before Mara could respond, they both heard an engine approaching, fast gravel spraying as tires skidded to a halt outside. Eli stood immediately, his body positioning itself between Mara and the door. Stay here, he said, voice hard as iron. Lock yourself in the guest room if you need to. But Mara couldn't move. She knew that engine sound. She knew the particular rhythm of those boots. On the porch steps, Victor had found her. The pounding on the door rattled the windows. Mara, I know you're in there. Get out here now. Eli opened the door just wide enough to fill the frame with his body. This is my property, and you're not welcome on it. Mara crept closer, peering around the kitchen doorway. Victor stood on the porch, red-faced and sweating, eyes wild with rage and something worse, wounded pride. That's my wife in there, old man. She's sick in the head, doesn't know what she's doing. I'm taking her home. Mini-climax number 12. She's not going anywhere she doesn't choose to go, Eli said, voice level but unyielding. And she's already told me what you did. Victor's face went from red to purple. She's a liar. What did she say? That I hit her. She's clumsy, always falling, hurting herself for attention. The bruises have fingerprints, Eli interrupted. Your fingerprints. For a moment, Victor seemed to shrink. Then he puffed back up with desperate bravado. You've got no right to keep a man from his wife. That's kidnapping or something. I'll have the sheriff on you. Please do. Sheriff Calder will be very interested in Mara's injuries. Victor's eyes narrowed, and Mara saw the calculation happening behind them, the same look he got when he was planning how to twist a situation to his advantage. You're sleeping with her, that's what this is. You're a lonely old bastard. And she, Eli's arm shot out, catching Victor's collar before the younger man could react. The movement was economical, controlled, but the message was clear. Mini-climax number 13. I'm going to say this once. Eli growled, his face inches from Victor's. Leave my property. If you come back, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. If you touch her again, I'll make sure you see the inside of a jail cell. Now get in your truck and drive away while you still can. He released Victor with a small shove that sent the younger man stumbling backward off the porch. Victor caught himself, and for a moment Mara thought he might rush at Eli. But something in the older man's stance, the quiet readiness, the absolute certainty made Victor reconsider. This isn't over, Victor hissed. Everyone's going to know what kind of woman she is, what kind of man you are. Small towns talk, old man. They'll run you both out before I'm through. He stormed to his truck, spraying gravel as he peeled away. The silence that followed felt heavier than the confrontation itself. Eli turned back to the house, and Mara saw his hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from restraint. He'd wanted to do more than shove Victor off the porch. Much more. You okay? He asked Mara. She nodded, unable to speak. She'd just watched someone stand up for her, actually stand up, risking social standing and possibly safety, and the enormity of it left her breathless. Mini-climax number 14. That night, Mara lay in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. Around 11, she heard footsteps in the hall outside her door, then the creak of wood. Through the gap under the door, she saw a shadow settle against the opposite wall. Eli had moved the rocking chair from the porch to the hallway outside her room. He was keeping watch. The knowledge should have made her feel trapped, but instead, it made her feel protected. She pulled the quilt up to her chin and for the first time in years, slept without nightmares. Dawn came too early and too bright. Mara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of birds, actual birds, not Victor's angry morning silences. She found Eli on the porch, 2 mugs already poured. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing her one. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of amber and rose. It was almost peaceful. "I'm going to tell you something," Eli said finally, "and I need you to believe it. What happened yesterday, Victor finding you, that's going to happen differently from here on out. We're going to control the narrative before he does." "How?" Mara's voice was small. Mini climax, number 15. "We start with documentation. Today we go to Doc Morrison. He's discreet, he's thorough, and he's seen enough ranch accidents to know the difference between a fall and a fist. He'll photograph everything, write it up official. Then we go to Sheriff Calder with the report, your statement, and a request for a restraining order. Victor will fight it. He'll make me sound crazy. Let him try. Facts beat stories every time." Eli's voice was firm. "But I won't lie to you, it's going to get ugly before it gets better. Victor's already planning to poison the well in town. You ready for that?" Mara thought about the alternative, running forever, hiding forever, or worse, going back. "I'm ready." "Then we move today. The longer we wait, the more time he has to build his lies." They were finishing their coffee when another vehicle approached, slower this time, more cautious. Eli tensed, but Mara recognized the faded blue pickup. "It's Martha Yates," she said. "She lives 2 properties over from Victor and me." An older woman in a flour-dusted apron climbed out carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. She approached the porch with hesitant steps, eyes darting between Eli and Mara. Mini climax, number 16. "I heard some things," Martha said without preamble, her voice tight with discomfort. "Victor's been in town since yesterday afternoon talking. He's saying awful things, Mara. Things about you and Mr. Hart here." "What kind of things?" Eli asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Martha flushed. "That you 2 are involved. That Mara ran to you. That this is about an affair, not what really happened." Mara felt the earth drop out from under her. Of course, Victor would do this. Paint himself as the wronged husband, her as the unfaithful wife, Eli as the home wrecker. The town would eat it up. Scandal always tasted better than truth. "He's lying," Mara said, but her voice lacked conviction. What did truth matter against a well-told lie? Martha set the basket on the porch railing, but she wouldn't meet Mara's eyes. "I believe you, honey, I do. But belief and public support are different things in a town this size. People are already choosing sides, and Victor's, well, he's got family here, business connections. He's making it hard for anyone to stand with you." She climbed back into her truck, calling out the window. "There's food in the basket, and Mara, whatever you need, whatever you decide to do, you be careful. That man's pride is wounded, and there's nothing more dangerous than that." As the truck disappeared down the drive, Mara felt the weight of isolation settling back over her shoulders like a familiar coat. She'd escaped Victor's fists only to face his words, and the words might do even more damage. Mini climax, 17. "We stick to the plan," Eli said, reading her despair. "Doc Morrison first, then the sheriff. Let Victor spin his stories, we'll bury them with evidence." They took Eli's truck into town an hour later. Mara wore Sarah's clothes and a baseball cap pulled low, but she still felt every stare like a brand. The town of Clearwater had maybe 2,000 people on a good day, and she could feel all 2,000 pairs of eyes on her. Doc Morrison's clinic sat on the edge of town, a small brick building that had served the community for 40 years. The doctor himself was in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and hands that had set every broken bone in 3 counties. He took one look at Mara and ushered them both into his examination room without a word. "Tell me what happened," he said gently, pulling on latex gloves. Mara told him everything. As she spoke, Doc Morrison conducted the most thorough examination she'd ever experienced, noting every bruise, every cut, photographing from multiple angles, measuring the size and pattern of contusions. "These are classic defensive wounds," he murmured, examining her forearms where she'd tried to block Victor's blows. "And this one," he touched the bruise on her ribs gently. "This matches the pattern of a boot toe." Mini-climax, numbered 18. When he finished, Doc Morrison pulled off his gloves and faced them both with a grave expression. "I'm writing this up as assault causing bodily harm. Multiple instances based on the age of various injuries. I'm also calling Sheriff Calder. This is a mandatory report situation." "Victor's already been to her," Mara said dully. "His version." "Then she'll be very interested in mine." Doc Morrison's jaw set. "I've lived in this town my whole life, seen it through good times and bad, but I won't see it turn its back on someone who needs help. Not on my watch." Eli drove them straight to the sheriff's office, Doc Morrison's report in a sealed envelope. Sheriff Ruth Calder was waiting, sitting behind her desk with the wary expression of someone who'd been expecting this visit but dreading it. Ruth Calder was a handsome woman in her mid-40s, with iron gray hair cut short and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been sheriff for 8 years, won by comfortable margins because she was tough but fair, hard-nosed but not heartless. "Mrs. Lane," she said, standing. "Mr. Hart, I think we need to have a conversation." Mini-climax number 19. They sat. Eli handed over the medical report. As Sheriff Calder read, her expression shifted from wary neutrality to grim determination. This is bad, Mara. Why didn't you come to me before?" The question, asked without accusation, but with genuine confusion, made Mara's throat tight. "He said no one would believe me, that he was respected and I was nobody, that if I tried to leave, he'd make sure I regretted it. And yesterday, when you ran, I wasn't thinking about reports or evidence or what came next. I was thinking about surviving the day." Sheriff Calder nodded slowly, the understanding of someone who'd perhaps seen this pattern before. "Okay, here's what I can do and what I can't. I can issue an emergency protective order based on this medical evidence. It'll keep Victor away from you legally. But the town talk, that's harder to control." "What's he been saying?" Eli asked. The sheriff's mouth pressed into a thin line. "That his wife ran off with you, that you seduced her, turned her against him, that she's making up abuse claims to justify adultery." She held up a hand forestalling their protests. "I know it's garbage, but he's got people listening. The deacon's already been by asking if I'm going to arrest you, Eli, for alienation of affection or some such nonsense." Mini-climax number 20. "Deacon Miller," Eli's voice went flat. "He's supposed to be a man of God." "He's a man of gossip first, God second," Sheriff Calder said bluntly. "And right now the gossip is more interesting than the truth. Which brings me to my problem." She leaned forward, her hands clasped on her desk. "I need you two to understand what you're up against. This isn't just about Victor anymore. This is about whether Clearwater is the kind of town that protects abusers or survivors, and I can't win that fight alone." "What do you need from us?" Mara asked. "The truth. On record. Detailed, dated, everything you can remember. I'll take your statement, file it with the medical report, and arrest Victor on assault charges. But when I do that, the town's going to explode. Some will stand with you, many won't. You need to be ready for that." Mara looked at Eli, then back at the sheriff. "I'm ready." "Then let's get started." For the next 2 hours, Mara relived every horror of her marriage while Sheriff Calder took notes. When they finished, the sheriff leaned back in her chair, looking older than she had at the start. "I'll bring Victor in tomorrow morning," she said. "Tonight you both should stay alert. Wounded pride makes men stupid, and stupid men make dangerous mistakes." They left the sheriff's office as the sun was setting, painting the main street in long shadows. Mara felt simultaneously lighter and heavier, lighter for having spoken her truth, heavier for knowing what came next. As they drove back to Eli's ranch, the desert twilight swallowed the last traces of daylight, leaving them in a darkness that felt both protective and ominous. Mara stared out the window, watching her reflection ghost across the glass, a stranger's face pale and hollowed by exhaustion. "You did good today," Eli said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving the sheriff's office. "I know that wasn't easy." "It was easier than I thought," Mara admitted, surprised by her own words. Saying it all out loud, having someone write it down like it mattered. Like I mattered. Eli's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You do matter. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." They were still 5 miles from the ranch when headlights appeared in the rear-view mirror, coming up fast. Too fast. Eli's jaw clenched as he recognized the aggressive driving pattern Victor's truck, weaving slightly, closing the distance between them with reckless speed. "Hold on," Eli muttered, pressing the accelerator. But Victor was faster, angrier, more desperate. His truck pulled alongside them on the narrow desert road, swerving dangerously close. Through the passenger window, Mara could see Victor's face, illuminated by the dashboard lights, contorted with rage, lips moving in what she knew were curses and threats, even though she couldn't hear them over the roar of engines. Eli tried to pull ahead, but Victor cut him off, forcing the truck onto the shoulder. Gravel sprayed against the undercarriage as Eli fought to keep control, finally bringing them to a skidding stop. Victor's truck blocked them from behind before Eli could reverse. "Stay in the truck," Eli commanded, reaching beneath his seat. For a terrifying moment, Mara thought he was going for a gun, but instead he pulled out a heavy flashlight, solid metal, useful as a weapon if needed. Victor was already out of his truck, storming toward them. Eli met him halfway, positioning his body between Victor and the passenger side, where Mara sat frozen. "You son of a bitch!" Victor's voice cracked with fury. "You turned her against me, filled her head with lies about me being some kind of monster. The only lies being told are yours," Eli said, voice dangerously calm, "and they're falling apart." Victor's hand shot out, grabbing Eli's collar. It was the wrong move. In one fluid motion born of decades working livestock and handling trouble, Eli broke the grip, twisted Victor's arm behind his back, and drove him face first into the hood of the truck. "I told you what would happen if you came near her again," Eli growled into Victor's ear. "You're done, Lane. Sheriff's coming for you tomorrow. You can go quiet or loud, but you're going either way." Victor struggled, but Eli held him pinned with surprising strength for a man his age. For a moment, Mara thought that would be the end of it. Victor subdued Eli in control, crisis averted. Then Victor went limp, the fight seeming to drain out of him. "Please," he gasped. "Please, just let me talk to her 5 minutes. I just need to explain." "No." The word was absolute. "Mara!" Victor's scream was raw, desperate. "Mara, please, I love you. Whatever I did, whatever you think I did, I'm sorry. Just come home. We can fix this." Mara's hand was on the door handle before she realized it, some sick, twisted part of her responding to the anguish in his voice. The same voice that had once promised to love and protect her before protection became possession and love became violence. "Don't," Eli said sharply, seeing her movement. "Don't let him manipulate you. That's what he does." Victor must have felt Eli's attention shift because he exploded into motion, driving his elbow back into Eli's ribs. The older man grunted, his grip loosening just enough for Victor to spin free. But instead of attacking Eli, Victor made a beeline for the truck for Mara. She locked the door just as his fist hit the window. "Open this door. You're my wife. You belong to me. I don't belong to anyone." The words tore from Mara's throat with a force that surprised her. "Not anymore." Eli grabbed Victor from behind, and this time there was no restraint. He slammed Victor against the truck bed once, twice, until the younger man's legs buckled. Then Eli let him drop to the gravel, standing over him with the flashlight raised. "If you ever come near her again, they won't find enough of you to arrest," Eli said, his voice shaking with controlled rage. "Now get in your truck and drive away before I forget I'm trying to be a better man than you." Victor crawled to his truck, blood streaming from his nose where it had connected with the truck bed. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he looked at Mara one last time, and what she saw in his eyes chilled her more than his anger ever had. Calculation. Cold, careful calculation. "You're going to regret this," he said, not shouting now, but speaking with eerie calm. "Both of you. This town will eat you alive." He drove off, taillights disappearing into the darkness like dying embers. Eli returned to the truck, breathing hard, flexing his hand where Victor's teeth had caught his knuckles. "You okay?" Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. The adrenaline was crashing now, leaving her shaking and nauseous. "We need to call Sheriff Calder," Eli said, pulling out his phone. "This was assault, witnessed fresh evidence." "No," Mara interrupted. "Please, not tonight. I need to go home. To your home. I need to not think about Victor for a few hours." Eli studied her face in the dashboard lights, then nodded. "Okay, but first thing tomorrow, we report this." "Agreed." "Agreed." They drove the rest of the way in silence, but when they reached the ranch house, Eli didn't immediately go inside. Instead, he sat in the truck, staring at his own hands. "I almost killed him," he said quietly. "When he went for you, I wanted to." "But you didn't," Mara said. "No, but I wanted to. And that scares me. I haven't felt that kind of rage in years, not since—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Never mind. Ancient history." "What happened to your daughter?" Mara asked gently. "Sarah, you mentioned her before." Eli's face went carefully blank. "She left when she was 18, said I was too controlling, too protective after her mother died. Maybe she was right. Haven't heard from her in 6 years. He opened the truck door. "Come on, let's get inside before—" Headlights swept across the property. For one heart-stopping moment, Mara thought Victor had returned, but the vehicle that pulled up was Sheriff Calder's cruiser, lights flashing but no siren. The sheriff got out, her expression grim. "Eli, Mara, we need to talk. Now." They followed her onto the porch, and Ruth Calder removed her hat, turning it in her hands, a nervous gesture that immediately put Mara on edge. "Victor came to my office an hour ago," she said without preamble. "Filed a formal complaint. Against you, Eli." "For what?" Eli's voice was dangerously quiet. "Assault, unlawful imprisonment, and—" She paused, looking genuinely pained. "Alienation of affection. He's claiming you seduced his wife, turned her against him, and then physically attacked him when he tried to bring her home." The words hung in the night air like a death sentence. "That's insane," Mara breathed. "He attacked us. We were defending ourselves." "I believe you," Sheriff Calder said, "but belief and proof are different things. Victor's got a witness, says someone saw the confrontation on the road, saw Eli attack first." "Who?" Eli demanded. "Ray Stillwater. Works for Victor at the feed store." "A bought witness," Eli spat. "Convenient." "Maybe, probably, but it complicates things." Sheriff Calder settled her weight, and Mara recognized the stance the sheriff was about to deliver. Worse news. "Victor's lawyer is pushing for your arrest, Eli. Tonight. They're calling it a pattern of violent interference in a marriage." "You can't be serious." "I don't have a choice. The complaint's been filed, there's a witness statement, and Victor's got documented injuries from tonight." She held up a hand. "I'm not arresting you. Yet. But I need you both to come to the station tomorrow morning, first thing. We'll sort this out properly, get your statements on record about tonight's incident." "And if we don't come in," Eli asked, "then Victor's lawyer will push for a warrant and I'll have to execute it." "Don't make me do that, Eli. Please." After the sheriff left, Mara and Eli sat on the porch in the darkness, the weight of the situation crushing down on them like physical pressure. He's doing exactly what he said he would. Mara whispered, destroying us with lies. And it's working. Not yet. It's not, Eli said, but his voice lacked conviction. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind against the windows sounded like Victor's voice. Around 2 a.m, she heard movement in the hallway and tensed, but it was only Eli settling into the rocking chair outside her door again. "You don't have to do that," she called through the door. "I know," came his reply. "Get some sleep, Mara." But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, her mind churned through everything that had happened, everything that could still happen. Victor was smart, smarter than she'd given him credit for. He wasn't just fighting with fists anymore. He was fighting with the law, with public opinion, with every tool society gave to men who wanted to maintain control. When dawn finally broke, Mara found Eli in the kitchen looking like he hadn't slept either. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his movements were slower, heavier, as if he'd aged a decade overnight. "I've been thinking," he said, as she poured herself coffee. "Maybe you should distance yourself from me. Go stay with someone else, maybe Doc Morrison, or even Sheriff Calder. Victor's targeting me as much as you now. If you're not here, no." The word came out sharper than Mara intended. "No, you don't get to sacrifice yourself for me. We're in this together now." "Mara, together," she repeated firmly. "Victor wants to isolate me, make me vulnerable again. I won't let him, and I won't let you face this alone when you're only in it, because you helped me." Eli studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Together, then. But we do this smart. We go to the sheriff, give our statements, and we start building a case that can't be torn down by lies." They were preparing to leave for the sheriff's office when Eli's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his face went pale. "When?" he asked. "How many?" A pause. "We'll be right there." He hung up, staring at the phone like it might explode. "That was Tom Henricks. Runs the feed store next to the hardware shop in town." Eli's voice was hollow. "There's a crowd gathering in the town square. Deacon Miller's called a community meeting about us." "A meeting about what exactly?" "About whether the town should take action against moral corruption and violence." Eli grabbed his truck keys. "We need to get there before this turns into a lynch mob." The drive into town was tense and silent. As they approached Clearwater's main square, Mara's stomach dropped. What Tom Henricks had called a crowd was closer to the entire town. Easily 100 people gathered in front of the old courthouse, with Deacon Miller standing on the steps like a fire and brimstone preacher. The deacon was in his 60s, with a shock of white hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from decades of telling people what to think. He'd been the moral compass of Clearwater for as long as anyone could remember, which meant his words carried weight that could crush or uplift. Right now, he was using that weight to crush. "Cannot stand by while the sanctity of marriage is destroyed." His voice boomed across the square. "A man's home is his castle, his wife his responsibility, and when outsiders interfere..." "That's enough, Deacon." Sheriff Calder's voice cut through the deacon's sermon. She stood at the edge of the crowd, hand resting on her service weapon, not threatening but present, a reminder of where authority actually lay. But Deacon Miller wasn't deterred. "Sheriff, surely you see the danger here. An older man alone for years suddenly takes in another man's wife. The situation speaks for itself." "The situation," Sheriff Calder said coldly, "is a domestic violence case under active investigation, and this mob gathering is interfering with that investigation." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victor stood near the front, looking appropriately wounded, a bandage across his nose arm in a sling that Mara knew damn well he didn't need yesterday, playing the victim beautifully. Eli parked the truck at the edge of the square and turned to Mara. "Stay in the truck, please. If this turns ugly..." "If it turns ugly, you'll need someone to witness it," Mara said, already opening her door. "I'm done hiding." They walked into the square together, and the crowd parted like they were carrying plague. Mara felt every eye on her, felt the weight of judgment and gossip and predetermined conclusions. There they are. Victor's voice rang out, dripping with righteous indignation. The people who destroyed my marriage, look at them, not even ashamed. Ashamed of what? Mara's voice surprised her with its strength. Ashamed of surviving, ashamed of refusing to be beaten anymore. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some faces showed doubt, others showed disgust, but at least they were listening. You ran to his bed the first chance you got, Victor spat. Don't play innocent now. I ran to save my life, Mara shot back. The bed I slept in had a lock on the door to keep people out, not in. Eli Hart saved me. That's all. That's the truth. Deacon Miller stepped down from the courthouse steps, his expression one of paternal disappointment. My child, we all know how the devil works. He makes sin seem like salvation. The devil I know wears a wedding ring. Mara interrupted, her voice cracking but holding. The devil I know told me I was worthless, that no one would believe me, that I deserved every bruise because I wasn't good enough, pretty enough, quiet enough. And you know what? He was right about one thing: people won't believe me. They'd rather believe a comfortable lie than an uncomfortable truth. She pulled up the sleeve of her borrowed shirt, revealing the fingerprint bruises that still mottled her upper arm. You want to talk about sin, Deacon? How about the sin of looking away? How about the sin of choosing reputation over righteousness? The square fell silent. Even Deacon Miller seemed at a loss for words. Then a woman stepped forward from the crowd, Martha Yates, who'd brought the basket of food yesterday. I believe her, Martha said quietly. I've seen the bruises before, we all have. We just didn't want to see them. She's clumsy, Victor said quickly. She falls. No woman falls that consistently, Martha interrupted. And no fall leaves fingerprints. Another voice joined in, Tom Henricks from the feed store. I've heard Victor lose his temper at the shop. Seen him grab his workers rough. If he does that in public, what's he do in private? The crowd was fracturing, doubt spreading like cracks in ice. Victor's face went red, then white, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling. This is a lie, he screamed. All of it. She's turned you against me just like she... Enough. Sheriff Calder's voice was steel. Victor Lane, you're under arrest for assault and battery. You have the right to remain silent. As the sheriff cuffed Victor, he thrashed and shouted, his mask of victimhood finally slipping to reveal the rage beneath. You can't do this. I have rights. She's my wife. She's her own person, Sheriff Calder said firmly, and you're done hurting her. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Victor was loaded into the sheriff's cruiser. Only when the car pulled away did the whispers start, not all supportive but less hostile than before. Deacon Miller approached Mara and Eli, his face troubled. I may have been hasty, if what you say is true. It is true, Mara said. Every word, and whether you believe it or not, doesn't change what happened. It only changes whether this town is a place where people like me can survive. The deacon nodded slowly, then turned to address the remaining crowd. Perhaps we should let the law handle this. And perhaps we should examine our own hearts for how quickly we condemned without evidence. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a start. As the crowd dispersed, Eli and Mara stood in the square, exhausted and emotionally battered, but still standing. That was brave, Eli said quietly. Stupidly brave. I learned from the best, Mara replied, managing a weak smile. They were turning to leave when a rock shattered the windshield of Eli's truck. Mara spun around, but the square was already nearly empty. Whoever threw it had vanished into the dispersing crowd. Spray painted on the side of the truck in dripping red letters were two words, Home Wrecker. Eli stared at the vandalism, jaw working. Some people's minds won't change no matter what evidence they see. Then we change what we can and survive the rest, Mara said, surprised by her own resolve. They spent the afternoon at the sheriff's office, giving detailed statements about the road confrontation. Sheriff Calder documented everything, including the rock through the windshield and the graffiti. "This is escalating," she said. "Even with Victor in custody, he's got supporters who might act on his behalf. I'm assigning a deputy to do regular patrols past Eli's ranch. And Mara, I need you to seriously consider a safe house situation." "No," Mara said. "Running is what got me into this mess. I'm done running." Sheriff Calder sighed. "Then at least let me post someone there tonight. Things are too volatile." Eli nodded. "Appreciated, Sheriff." But when they returned to the ranch that evening, there was no deputy waiting. Instead, there was a note tacked to the front door, written in Victor's handwriting that Mara would recognize anywhere. "They can't protect you forever. I always get what's mine." Eli crumpled the note, fury and fear warring in his expression. "He's supposed to be in custody." "Bail," Mara whispered. "His family has money. They must have posted bail." The realization settled over them like a death shroud. Victor was out there angrier than ever with nothing left to lose. That night Eli didn't bother with the rocking chair. He sat in the living room with every light in the house, blazing a baseball bat across his lap, watching the windows for shadows that might be Victor or his proxies. Mara joined him around midnight, unable to sleep. "This is my fault. You're in danger because of me." "No," Eli said firmly. "I'm in danger because I chose to help, and I'd make that choice again, every time." "Why?" The question burst from Mara. "Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" Eli was quiet for a long moment. "Because 6 years ago my daughter Sarah needed help. She was in a bad relationship, tried to tell me, and I didn't listen well enough. Told her she was overreacting, that she needed to work it out, that marriage was about commitment. 2 months later she left the boyfriend, left me, left everything, and I haven't seen her since." His voice cracked. "I failed her when she needed me most. I won't fail someone else the same way. I can't." Mara reached over and took his hand. "You didn't fail me. You saved me." "Not yet, I haven't," Eli said grimly. "Not until this is really over." Around 3 in the morning, they both heard it, the sound of an engine running without headlights, creeping up the long driveway to the ranch. Eli was on his feet instantly, phone in one hand, bat in the other. "Get to the back bedroom, lock the door. Don't come out unless I tell you to, or you hear sirens." "Eli, go!" Mara ran, her heart hammering. From the back bedroom window, she could see the vehicle, a dark truck, definitely not Victor's, parking 100 yards from the house. 2 figures got out. Eli's voice carried from the front porch. "This is private property. You're trespassing. Leave now or I call the sheriff." "We ain't here to cause trouble," a male voice called back. "Just here to deliver a message from Victor. Man wants his property back." "She's not property, and you need to leave." "Can't do that. Victor paid us good money to bring her back. You can hand her over peaceful, or we can do this rough. Your choice, old man." The situation was deteriorating fast. Mara grabbed Eli's landline phone and dialed 911, whispering urgently to the dispatcher. But she knew it would be 10 minutes before anyone arrived, and 10 minutes was an eternity. She heard the front door slam, heard Eli's voice raised in warning, then the unmistakable sound of violence, bodies hitting the porch, grunts of pain and effort. Mara couldn't hide anymore. She grabbed a fireplace poker from the back room and ran toward the sounds of the fight, every instinct screaming at her to help the man who'd helped her. The scene on the front porch was chaos. Eli had one man pinned against the wall, but the second was behind him, arm locked around Eli's throat. The older man's face was turning red, his struggles growing weaker. Mara didn't think. She swung the poker, catching the choking man across the shoulders. He released Eli with a howl, spinning to face her. For a moment they locked eyes, this stranger who'd come to drag her back into hell, and Mara saw her own reflection in his pupils. She saw a woman who was done being a victim. "Touch him again," she said, voice deadly calm, "and I'll crack your skull open." The man must have seen something in her expression that convinced him she meant it, because he backed away, hands raised. His companion was already stumbling toward their truck, blood streaming from a split lip courtesy of Eli's fist. "This ain't over," the choking man shouted as they retreated. "Victor wants you bad, lady. He ain't gonna stop." "Let him come," Mara replied. "I'm not running anymore." They peeled out, leaving twin tracks of rubber on the driveway. Moments later, sirens wailed in the distance. Sheriff Calder's deputies finally arriving. Eli slumped against the porch railing, catching his breath. "You shouldn't have come out. You should have stayed hidden." "We're past hiding," Mara said, helping him inside. "Both of us." The deputies took statements, photographed the scene, and promised increased patrols. But as they left and dawn broke over the ranch, Mara and Eli both knew the truth. Victor wouldn't stop. The arrest hadn't stopped him. The restraining order wouldn't stop him. Public exposure wouldn't stop him. The only thing that would stop Victor Lane was the truth presented so thoroughly and undeniably that even his money and connections couldn't save him. "We need more than defense," Mara said as the sun rose. "We need to go on offense. We need to destroy his credibility before he destroys us." Eli looked at her, seeing not the broken woman he'd found in the desert, but someone harder, someone forged in fire. "Then that's exactly what we'll do," he said. The plan came together over burnt coffee and the kind of exhaustion that made everything seem both crystal clear and impossible at the same time. Mara sat at Eli's kitchen table, a legal pad in front of her, methodically writing down every instance of abuse. She could remember dates, times, witnesses who might have seen the aftermath, even if they'd chosen to look away. 3 years, she said, her pen moving steadily across the paper. 3 years of doctor visits, pharmacy, runs for pain medication, excuses to neighbors about why I couldn't attend church or social gatherings. Someone saw something. Someone always sees something. Eli paced the kitchen, his tactical mind already working through the angles. Doc Morrison's report is solid, but it only covers recent injuries. We need a pattern. Medical records from before, pharmacy receipts, anything that shows this wasn't a one-time incident. "The clinic in Roswell," Mara said, suddenly looking up. "When Victor broke my arm 18 months ago, he drove me there because it was far enough that no one would ask questions. They'll have records. Then we get those records. We also need to find those 2 men who came here last night. Sheriff needs to arrest them for assault, and if they flip on Victor for hiring them, they won't flip." Mara interrupted, her voice flat with certainty. "Victor pays too well and threatens too thoroughly. I've seen him buy loyalty before." Eli stopped pacing. "Then we find another way to prove he sent them." The sound of tires on gravel made them both freeze. Mara's hand automatically reached for the fireplace poker she'd left by the door, but Eli touched her shoulder gently. "It's okay. I recognize the truck." Tom Henricks climbed out of his battered pickup carrying a cardboard box. He approached the porch cautiously, like a man walking into a minefield. "Mr. Hart, Mrs. Lane." He set the box down on the porch railing. "Got something you might be interested in. Victor's employment records from my feed store. Had to let him go 6 months back for volatile behavior through a 50-pound feed bag at one of my workers over a pricing dispute." Mara felt something shift in her chest, hope sharp and almost painful. "Why are you helping us?" Tom's weathered face creased with shame. "Because I should have helped sooner. I knew what kind of man Victor was. We all did. But knowing and doing something about it are different things. And I chose the coward's path. Can't undo that, but maybe I can help send things right now." Eli took the box and Tom tipped his hat before leaving. Inside were not just employment records, but written complaints from 3 different workers about Victor's temper, his threats, his inability to control his rage when things didn't go his way. "This is good," Eli said, spreading the documents across the kitchen table. "This establishes pattern and character, shows the court he's got a history of violence, not just with you." "It won't be enough," Mara said, though she was studying the papers with hungry eyes. His lawyer will argue work stress is different from domestic issues, that how he treats employees doesn't reflect how he treats family. Then we keep building, layer by layer, brick by brick, until the wall's so high his lies can't climb over it. They spent the morning on the phone. Doc Morrison agreed to request Mara's medical records from the Roswell Clinic. Sheriff Calder confirmed she was tracking down the two men from last night through vehicle registration. Martha Yates called with the names of 3 other women in town who dated Victor before Mara, women who might have their own stories to tell. By noon, the foundation was taking shape, but foundations needed to be built fast because Victor's lawyer was already in motion. A courier arrived with legal papers. Victor was filing for divorce on grounds of adultery and seeking full control of their shared assets, claiming Mara had abandoned the marriage. "He's trying to leave me with nothing," Mara said, reading the documents with shaking hands. "The house, the truck, even the money my mother left me that I put into our joint account. He wants it all. Then we fight it, every line, every claim." Eli was already dialing his own lawyer, a shrewd woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in family law and had a reputation for taking on cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. Patricia arrived within the hour, a compact woman in her 50s with sharp eyes behind designer glasses and a briefcase that looked like it had survived several wars. She read through Victor's filing with the detached efficiency of a surgeon examining an X-ray. "He's overplaying his hand," she said finally. "Asking for everything makes him look vindictive, not reasonable. And filing for divorce while there's an active domestic violence investigation. His lawyer should have advised against that. It makes it look like he's trying to muddy the waters." "Can we win?" Mara asked. Patricia looked at her directly. "Can we win the divorce?" "Yes, especially with the evidence you're gathering." "Can we win the criminal case against him?" "That's the prosecutor's job, but we can make sure the civil case supports it." "Can we win your life back?" "That's going to take more than legal victories." The blunt honesty was refreshing after days of carefully worded reassurances. Mara found herself liking this woman. "What do you need from me?" Mara asked. "Everything. Every email, text message, voicemail. Every gift he gave you, then destroyed in a rage. Every time he isolated you from friends or family. Every financial record showing he controlled the money. This isn't just about proving abuse, it's about proving systematic control designed to keep you trapped." For the next 3 hours, Mara excavated her marriage like an archaeological dig, uncovering layers of manipulation and control she'd normalized just to survive. Patricia took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, building the case piece by piece. Evening was falling when Sheriff Calder called. "We got them, the 2 men from last night. Pulled them over heading south on Highway 70. They're at the station now." "Did they talk?" Eli asked, phone on speaker so Mara could hear. "Not yet, but we found $2,000 cash in the truck, and one of them had Victor's business card in his wallet with a note, 'Bring her back whatever it takes.' That's conspiracy right there." Mara felt the pieces clicking together, the web of evidence tightening around Victor like a noose. But she also felt something else, a cold certainty that Victor wouldn't go down without taking them with him if he could. "Sheriff, what about Victor?" she asked. "Where is he now?" A pause. "That's the problem. He posted bail this morning. His family put up their ranch as collateral. He's supposed to be confined to his property with an ankle monitor, but what? The monitoring company just called. His signal went dead 20 minutes ago. Either the device malfunctioned or he cut it off. We've got units heading to his ranch now, but Mara, if he's running, he might come for you first." The line went dead. Eli was already moving, checking windows, locking doors. "We need to leave. Now. Go somewhere he can't predict." "No." Mara's voice was steel. "I'm done running. Let him come, but this time we're ready." Eli started to argue, then saw her face and thought better of it. Instead, he made a different call to Doc Morrison, to Tom Henricks, to Martha Yates. to everyone who'd shown even a glimmer of support. I need people at my ranch. Now. Witnesses protection, I don't care what you call it. But we need bodies here, people who can testify to what happens if Victor shows up. Within 30 minutes, trucks started arriving. Tom Henricks brought 3 of his workers. Doc Morrison came with his medical bag, ready to document any injuries. Martha Yates arrived with her husband and 2 grown sons. Even Deacon Miller showed up looking uncomfortable but determined. I may have been wrong about you, the deacon said to Eli and Mara. I won't be wrong about protecting someone in need. They arranged themselves around the property, some on the porch, others near the barn, a few in trucks positioned to block the driveway. It wasn't quite a militia, but it was a community finally choosing to stand for something. The waiting was excruciating. Every sound made Mara's heart race, a coyote's howl. In the distance, the wind rattling the barn door, the creak of wood settling. Eli stayed close to her, his presence steady and reassuring. When this is over, Mara said quietly, I don't know what comes next. I don't know how to be a person outside of being Victor's wife or Victor's victim. You'll figure it out, Eli replied. Same way everyone does, one day at a time, making mistakes and learning from them. What if I can't? What if I'm too broken? Eli turned to face her fully. You stood in that town square and told your truth in front of everyone. You fought off 2 men with a fireplace poker. You're building a legal case that could put your abuser in prison. Mara, if that's broken, I'd hate to see what you're like whole. The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and protective. She was opening her mouth to respond when the sound of an engine, loud, aggressive, unmistakable, roared up the driveway. Victor's truck came in fast, headlights on high beam, blinding everyone on the property. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop in a cloud of dust. The door flew open and Victor stumbled out. But this wasn't the controlled, manipulative Victor from the town square or even the enraged Victor from the road confrontation. This was something worse. Victor unraveled, eyes, wild clothes, disheveled, a man who'd lost his grip on the narrative he'd been selling and had nothing left but raw desperation. Mara, his voice cracked like breaking glass. Mara, get out here. Tom Henricks and his workers moved to intercept, but Mara pushed past them. I'm here, Victor. What do you want? Seeing her seemed to simultaneously calm and enrage him. What do I want? I want my wife back. I want my life back. You've destroyed everything. The town thinks I'm a monster. The sheriff's trying to lock me up. Even my own family is turning on me, all because you couldn't handle a little discipline. A little discipline, Mara repeated, her voice eerily calm. Is that what you call breaking my arm, locking me in a room for 2 days without food, choking me until I passed out? I was teaching you. Victor's face contorted. Teaching you to be a good wife, to respect your husband, to know your place. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Mara saw Deacon Miller's face go pale, saw Martha Yates cover her mouth in horror. Victor had just confirmed everything in front of a dozen witnesses. But Victor wasn't done. You know what, fine, you want a divorce, you want your freedom, take it, but you're not taking my dignity, my reputation, my place in this community. I'd rather see you dead than see you happy without me. He reached behind his back and time seemed to slow. Mara saw Eli moving toward her, saw Tom Henricks shouting a warning, saw the gleam of metal as Victor pulled out a pistol. If I can't have you, Victor said, raising the gun, no one can. The shot that rang out didn't come from Victor's gun. It came from Sheriff Calder, who'd arrived unnoticed during the confrontation, her service weapon drawn and aimed. The bullet took Victor in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying into the dirt. He went down hard, screaming in pain and rage, and within seconds, the sheriff's deputies were on him, cuffing his hands, even as he thrashed and cursed. Sheriff Calder kicked Victor's gun away, then stood over him with an expression of grim satisfaction. Victor Lane, you're under arrest for attempted murder, violating a restraining order, and destroying a monitoring device. And that's just to start. She looked up at the assembled crowd. Everyone here, just witnessed an attempted murder. I'm going to need statements from all of you." Mara stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Victor had tried to kill her in front of everyone. There was no spinning this, no manipulating the narrative, no buying his way out. He'd destroyed himself more thoroughly than she ever could have. Eli's arms wrapped around her as her legs gave out. "It's over," he murmured. "It's really over." But even as the ambulance arrived to treat Victor's shoulder before taking him to the county jail's medical ward, even as Sheriff Calder began taking statements, Mara couldn't quite believe it. 3 years of terror, and it ended with a single gunshot that wasn't even aimed at her. The irony would have been funny if she had any capacity for laughter left. The next days blurred together in a haze of legal proceedings and media attention. Victor's attempted murder charge, combined with the mountain of evidence Mara and Patricia had assembled, created a case so airtight that even Victor's expensive lawyers advised him to take a plea deal. He refused, of course. Victor's pride wouldn't allow admission of guilt, even when guilt was recorded on video by 3 different phones and witnessed by a dozen people, including a deacon and a sheriff. The trial was set for 6 weeks out, but in the meantime, Mara had other battles to fight. The divorce proceedings became a proving ground for everything she'd learned about standing up for herself. Victor's lawyer tried every trick, claiming she'd provoked him, that her adultery justified his actions, that she was exaggerating the abuse for financial gain. Patricia Chen demolished each argument with the precision of a surgeon and the ferocity of a warrior. Medical records, pharmacy receipts, testimony from Doc Morrison, from Tom Henricks, from the 3 ex-girlfriends who came forward with their own stories of Victor's escalating violence. One of them, a woman named Rebecca Torres, testified that Victor had held a knife to her throat during their relationship 5 years ago. "I didn't report it," she said, voice shaking, "because I thought no one would believe me, because I thought I was alone. I'm sorry I stayed quiet, Mara. I'm sorry you had to suffer because I was too scared to speak." Mara reached across the courtroom divide and took Rebecca's hand. "You're speaking now. That's what matters." The moment crystallized something in the town's consciousness. This wasn't just about Mara Lane anymore. It was about every woman who'd been hurt and stayed silent, every person who'd seen something and looked away, every system that had enabled Victor's violence through indifference or active complicity. Clearwater had to choose what kind of town it wanted to be. The divorce judge ruled in Mara's favor on every point. She got the house, the truck, her mother's inheritance restored, and a restraining order that would last long after Victor's prison sentence ended. Standing on the courthouse steps afterward, holding the decree that officially ended her marriage, Mara felt simultaneously lighter and heavier. "Strange, isn't it?" she said to Eli, who'd been there for every hearing, every testimony, every small victory. "I thought getting free would feel like flying. Instead, it feels like gravity, like I'm finally heavy enough to stay grounded." "That's because you're real now," Eli replied. "Not the person Victor wanted you to be, not the person you had to be to survive, just you, and that's always heavier than pretending." The criminal trial came 3 weeks later. Mara sat in the witness box for 6 hours, recounting every detail of her abuse while Victor glared at her from the defense table. His shoulder had healed, but something in him had broken that night. He'd pulled the gun. The calculated manipulator was gone, replaced by a bitter shell of a man who couldn't accept that he'd lost. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, aggravated assault, witness intimidation, violating a protective order, conspiracy to commit kidnapping for hiring those 2 men. The judge sentenced him to 18 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 12 if he completed anger management and domestic violence intervention programs. "Mr. Lane," the judge said, looking at Victor with undisguised contempt, "you have shown a pattern of violence, manipulation, and complete disregard for your wife's humanity. You treated her as property, as something to be controlled and discarded at will. This court will not tolerate such behavior, and this sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes." Victor was led away in chains, and Mara watched him go. Without tears, without satisfaction, without anything but a bone-deep weariness. Justice had been served, but it couldn't erase the 3 years she'd lost, or the scars that would never fully fade. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered with cameras and microphones. Mara had avoided them throughout the trial, but now she stopped, turned to face them, and spoke clearly into the forest of recording devices. "My name is Mara Lane, and I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I'm speaking now not just for myself, but for every person who's been told they're worthless, that they deserved the abuse, that no one would believe them. You are believed. You are worth saving, and there are people who will help you if you can find the courage to ask." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I also want to say something to the people who saw what was happening and didn't act, who heard the rumors and chose not to investigate, who valued reputation over righteousness. You have a choice every day to look away or to look closer, to stay silent or to speak up. I hope you choose differently next time." The questions started immediately asking about her relationship with Eli, about her plans for the future, about whether she forgave Victor, but Patricia stepped in, ushering Mara away to a waiting truck. Eli drove them back to the ranch in silence, giving Mara space to process everything. The sun was setting as they pulled into the driveway, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch looked the same as it had the day he'd found her broken and bleeding in the scrub brush, but everything else had changed. "What happens now?" Mara asked, echoing the question she'd posed weeks ago. But this time she wasn't asking out of fear or uncertainty. She was asking because the future stretched before her, vast and open and full of possibilities she'd never allowed herself to imagine. "Now," Eli said, "you figure out who Mara Lane is when she's not surviving. You figure out what you want, where you want to be, what kind of life you want to build. And what do you want?" Eli was quiet for a moment. "I want to know I made a difference. I want to sleep at night knowing I didn't fail someone who needed help. Beyond that," he shrugged, "I'm still figuring it out myself." That night, for the first time since arriving at Eli's ranch, Mara slept without the chair in the hallway, without the locked door, without the hypervigilance that had become second nature. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, and when she woke to bird song and morning light, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. Mara started seeing a therapist in Albuquerque, making the 2-hour drive twice a week to work through the trauma that couldn't be resolved in a courtroom. She began volunteer work at a women's shelter, using her experience to help others find their way out of abusive situations. And she started to remember who she'd been before Victor, a woman who loved to paint, who read voraciously, who had dreams beyond simply surviving to the next day. She set up an easel on Eli's porch and began capturing the desert landscape in watercolors, the therapeutic rhythm of brush against paper helping to quiet the voices of doubt and self-recrimination. Eli gave her space while remaining steadily present, a quiet guardian who asked nothing and offered everything. They fell into an easy domesticity, sharing meals and chores and comfortable silences. It wasn't romantic exactly, but it was intimate in a way that mattered more, built on trust and mutual respect rather than need or passion. One evening, about 2 months after Victor's sentencing, a truck pulled up to the ranch. Mara was on the porch painting the sunset when a young woman climbed out, maybe 24 or 25, with Eli's dark hair and his careful way of moving. Eli emerged from the barn, saw the woman, and froze. "Sarah." "Hi, Dad." Sarah Hart said, her voice cautious. "I heard about what happened, saw it on the news. Took me a while to work up the courage to come, but I needed to see you." Father and daughter stood 10 feet apart, a chasm of 6 years between them. Then Sarah crossed the distance and wrapped her arms around Eli, and he held her like she might disappear if he loosened his grip. "I'm sorry," Sarah said into his shoulder. I'm sorry I left like that. Sorry I stayed away so long. You were right about Jake. He was bad news, controlling, dangerous. I was too proud to admit it, too stubborn to come home. By the time I finally left him, I didn't know how to bridge the gap I'd created. You're here now, Eli said, voice thick. That's what matters. They talked late into the night, Eli and Sarah rebuilding a relationship, one careful word at a time. Mara gave them privacy, but she caught enough to understand that Sarah had her own story of survival, her own journey from victim to survivor. Before Sarah left the next morning, she pulled Mara aside. Thank you, she said simply, for giving my dad a second chance to get it right, for showing him what helping someone actually looks like. He saved my life, Mara replied, and you saved his. Sarah said, you gave him purpose again. Don't underestimate what that means. As Sarah's truck disappeared down the driveway, Eli stood beside Mara on the porch, and she saw something in his expression she'd never seen before, contentment maybe, or at least the possibility of it. Seems like we're both getting second chances, he observed. Seems like, Mara agreed. The town's attitude shifted gradually like a glacier changing course, imperceptible day to day but undeniable over time. People who'd condemned Mara started nodding to her in the grocery store. Deacon Miller invited her to speak at the church about surviving abuse, about finding faith in human goodness, even after experiencing human cruelty. Martha Yates organized a community support group for domestic violence survivors, and Mara became a regular facilitator. Clearwater was learning slowly and imperfectly to be a town that protected rather than enabled, that believed victims rather than dismissing them, that valued truth over comfort. It wasn't perfect. Some people still muttered about Mara being a home wrecker, about Eli being a white knight with ulterior motives. But the chorus of support was louder now, drowning out the whispers with affirmation and action. 6 months after Victor's sentencing, Mara made a decision. She sold the house she'd shared with him, couldn't bear to live in those rooms where she'd suffered, and used the money to buy a small property on the edge of town. It had a studio space perfect for painting and enough land for a garden. She invited Eli to see it before she closed the deal. What do you think? She asked as they walked the property. I think it's exactly what you need, he said. Your own space, your own future. I've been thinking, Mara began, then paused, suddenly nervous. About the future, I mean, about what comes next. And I think I want to start a program, something official, structured, a place where survivors can learn practical skills, financial planning, legal rights, self-defense, job training, not just therapy, but tools to build a new life. Eli's face lit up with understanding. You want to give people what you had to fight for. Exactly. Sheriff Calder's already agreed to partner teach self-defense and legal rights classes. Doc Morrison will volunteer for the medical component. Patricia Chen offered to do pro bono legal consultations. I just need... She trailed off. Need what? Someone to help me run it. Someone who understands what it means to save a life and how much work it takes to rebuild one after. Eli understood what she was asking. You want me to co-direct this program? I want you to help me turn your ranch into something more than a safe house. I want to make it a place where people don't just survive, they learn to thrive. He considered this for a long moment. My ranch, I couldn't buy it from you, obviously, but maybe we could work out a partnership. You provide the space, I provide the program development and fundraising. We build something that lasts beyond both of us. Eli smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Mara Lane, are you asking me to go into business with you? I'm asking you to help me save lives. The business part is just logistics. Then yes, he said without hesitation. Yes, absolutely. They shook hands on the porch of what would become the Quiet Hands program, a name chosen because sometimes the most powerful thing someone could offer was hands that didn't harm, hands that helped build instead of destroy. The program launched 3 months later with funding from a state domestic violence prevention grant and private donations from community members who wanted to be part of the solution. The ranch house was renovated to include classroom space, a computer lab, a kitchen for teaching cooking and budgeting, and residential rooms for participants who needed temporary housing. Mara ran the day-to-day operations while Eli managed the property and taught practical skills, fence mending, animal care, basic carpentry. Sheriff Calder came weekly to teach self-defense. Patricia Chen held monthly legal clinics. Doc Morrison provided medical screening and care. But the heart of the program was the participants themselves, women and men who arrived broken and left with tools to build themselves back up, who came as victims and graduated as survivors, who entered alone and left as part of a community. On the 1-year anniversary of the program's opening, Mara stood before a crowd gathered on the ranch for a celebration. The sun was setting, casting the same golden light that had illuminated her first terrified morning in the desert. But this time there was no fear, only hope. "A year ago," she began, "I was hiding behind a scrub brush, begging a stranger not to look at me because I was so ashamed of what I'd become. That stranger, Eli Hart, chose to see me anyway, not my shame but my humanity, not what I'd suffered but what I could survive." She paused, finding Eli in the crowd. He nodded, encouraging her to continue. "This program exists because one person chose to help when it would have been easier to look away. But it thrives because a community chose to change, to stand with survivors instead of enabling abusers. Every person here made that choice. Sheriff Calder, Doc Morrison, Patricia Chen, Deacon Miller, Martha Yates, and dozens of others." Mara's voice strengthened. "We can't undo the past. We can't erase the scars. But we can make sure that the next person who needs help doesn't have to beg for it, doesn't have to prove they deserve it, doesn't have to survive alone. That's what this program is about. That's what this community is becoming about." The applause was thunderous, but Mara barely heard it. She was looking at the faces in the crowd. Participants who'd found their strength, volunteers who'd found their purpose, a community that had found its conscience. As the celebration continued into the evening, Eli pulled Mara aside. "You did it," he said simply. "You turned your pain into purpose." "We did it," Mara corrected. "I couldn't have survived without you, and this program couldn't exist without your support." "So what's next?" "You've built the program, changed the town, testified against your abuser, and started healing. What does Mara Lane do for an encore?" Mara laughed, the sound lighter than she'd ever thought possible. "I keep going, I keep helping, I keep learning how to be a person who's more than her trauma." She looked at the ranch house, lit up with warmth and laughter. "And maybe I finally learn how to be happy." "I think you're already learning," Eli observed. "You just haven't noticed yet." The night settled over the ranch like a benediction, stars emerging in the vast New Mexico sky. Somewhere in a prison cell, Victor Lane was serving his sentence, his power finally broken. Somewhere in the world, someone was suffering the way Mara had suffered, waiting for someone to see them, to believe them, to help them. But here, on this ranch that had become a sanctuary, Mara Lane stood among friends and survivors and allies, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed, no longer begging anyone not to look. She was finally visible in all the right ways, strong, purposeful, and unbreakably human. The happiness Mara was learning to recognize came in unexpected moments. The smell of coffee brewing at dawn, the sound of participants laughing during a self-defense class, the weight of a paintbrush in her hand as she captured the desert's endless variations of light. But healing, she discovered, wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral circling back to old wounds, even as it moved forward toward wholeness. 3 months after the program's first anniversary, Mara woke at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat, Victor's voice still echoing in her ears. From a nightmare so vivid she could smell the whiskey on his breath. She stumbled to the kitchen of her small house, hands shaking as she tried to pour water into a glass and mist liquid splashing across the counter. Damn it, she whispered, pressing her palms against the cool tile. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Her phone buzzed a text from Eli, who seemed to have a sixth sense for when she was struggling. You up? Saw your light on from the barn. She called him, needing to hear a voice that wasn't Victor's ghost. Bad night, she said when he answered. Want company or space? The fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice, made her throat tight. Company, if you don't mind. 20 minutes later, they sat on her porch watching the stars fade toward dawn. Eli didn't ask about the nightmare, didn't push for details. He just sat solid and present, a reminder that not all male presence meant danger. I thought I was past this, Mara finally said. It's been over a year since the trial. Victor's locked up. I'm safe. So why does my body still think I'm in danger? Because trauma doesn't follow a timeline, Eli replied. It doesn't care that the threat is gone. It remembers when you weren't safe, and it's trying to protect you from ghosts. How did you deal with it after losing your wife, after Sarah left? Eli was quiet for so long, Mara thought he might not answer. Then badly at first. Drank too much, worked until I couldn't think, pushed away anyone who tried to help. Took me years to realize that avoiding the pain didn't make it smaller, it just made it harder to face when it finally caught up. And now I let it exist. The grief, the regret, the what-ifs. I don't fight them anymore. I just make sure they don't drive the bus. He glanced at her. You'll get there. You're already halfway there. You're building something instead of hiding from something. The words settled over Mara like a blanket, warm but not smothering. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber, she felt the nightmare's grip loosening. Not gone, never fully gone, but manageable. The day ahead brought its own challenges. The Quiet Hands program was hosting its first public fundraiser, a community dinner designed to raise money for expansion and showcase the work they'd accomplished. Mara had been planning it for months, but now, standing in the ranch's main hall, watching volunteers set up tables and hang decorations, panic clawed at her chest. What if no one comes? She asked Patricia Chen, who'd arrived early, to help coordinate. Then we'll eat a lot of casserole ourselves, Patricia replied dryly. But they'll come. This town has seen what you've built. They want to be part of it. By 6 o'clock, the parking area was full, trucks and cars stretching down the driveway. People streamed in, some Mara recognized, others she didn't, all bringing food and donations and curiosity about the program that had transformed a lonely ranch into a beacon of hope. Deacon Miller arrived with his wife carrying a donation check that made Mara's eyes widen. The church congregation voted, he said. We want to sponsor a scholarship fund for program participants who need housing assistance. Tom Henricks and his workers brought barbecue equipment and spent the evening grilling, refusing payment. You gave my nephew a job, Tom said, referring to one of the program participants who'd completed the job training component. This is the least I can do. Martha Yates organized a bake sale, the proceeds going entirely to the program. Even Sheriff Calder showed up in civilian clothes, her teenage daughter in tow. She wants to volunteer, Ruth explained. Teach basic legal rights to younger participants. As Mara moved through the crowd, accepting thanks and deflecting praise, she felt something shift inside her, a recognition that she'd somehow become part of this community's fabric, woven in through survival and service. But the evening's warmth was interrupted when a stranger approached a man in his 30s, wearing an expensive suit that marked him as an outsider. He introduced himself as James Whitmore, a journalist from Albuquerque working on a story about domestic violence intervention programs. I'd love to feature the Quiet Hands program, he said, handing Mara his card. Your story, the program's success rate, the community transformation, it's exactly the kind of positive narrative we need. Mara's instinct was to refuse. She'd avoided media attention after the trial, preferring to let the work speak for itself. But Patricia, who'd overheard, pulled her aside. Think about it, Patricia urged. Publicity could mean more funding, more participants helped, more communities inspired to create similar programs. Your story could save lives, or it could paint a target on my back, Mara countered. What if Victor sees it in prison? What if it brings attention from people who think I'm exaggerating or looking for fame? What if it helps someone escape before they end up like you did? Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. You're not responsible for how people react, Mara. You're only responsible for whether you speak your truth. Mara looked across the room to where Eli was helping Sarah set up a display of before and after photos of the ranch renovation. He caught her eye and smiled, that quiet confidence that had anchored her through the worst moments. She turned back to James Whitmore. I'll think about it, but any story would need to include other survivors, not just me. This isn't about one person, it's about a movement. Absolutely, James agreed. I want to tell the whole story, the problem, the solution, and the people making it happen. After he left, the evening continued with speeches and testimonials. One participant, a woman named Rosa, who'd completed the program 6 months earlier, stood before the crowd with tears streaming down her face. I came here broken, Rosa said, voice shaking but steady. My husband had convinced me I was worthless, that I deserved everything he did to me. This program didn't just give me skills or resources, it gave me back my belief that I deserved to exist, to be safe, to be happy. She looked directly at Mara. You saved my life. All of you did. The applause was thunderous, but Mara barely heard it. She was too busy trying not to cry, too busy recognizing that this moment of witnessing someone else's transformation was why all the pain had been worth enduring. The fundraiser raised over $40,000, enough to expand the program's residential capacity and hire a full-time counselor. As the last guests departed and volunteers cleaned up, Mara stood on the porch watching the desert stars emerge, feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized. Eli joined her carrying 2 bottles of beer. You did good tonight. We did good, Mara corrected, accepting the bottle. I can't take credit for what's become a community effort. You started it. That counts for something. They drank in comfortable silence until Sarah emerged from the main hall, phone in hand and expression troubled. Dad, you need to see this. She held out the phone, showing a news article from earlier that day. The headline made Mara's blood freeze. Convicted abuser Victor Lane appeals sentence, claims self-defense and judicial bias. According to the article, Victor's new legal team, funded by his family's remaining assets, was arguing that the trial had been tainted by media coverage and community prejudice, that he'd been defending himself against false accusations, and that the attempted murder charge should be reduced to aggravated assault. He's claiming you orchestrated everything, Sarah said, quietly scrolling through the article. That you seduced Eli to create a false narrative, that the sheriff was biased, that the witnesses were coached. His lawyers are painting him as the real victim. Mara's hands clenched around the beer bottle so tightly she was surprised it didn't shatter. Can he actually win an appeal? Unlikely, Eli said, but his voice was tight. The evidence was overwhelming, the verdict unanimous. But appeals can drag on for years, keep him in the news, keep you connected to him. I need to call Patricia, Mara said, already reaching for her phone. Patricia answered on the second ring, clearly having seen the same news. I'm already on it. Filed a motion to intervene in the appeal as your representative. The prosecutor's office is preparing their counter-arguments. Mara, this is standard. Abusers often appeal, especially when they have resources. It doesn't mean he'll succeed. But it means I'm not free of him, Mara said, hating the way her voice cracked. It means he still has power over my life. Only the power you give him, Patricia replied. He's desperate, grasping at straws. The appeal will fail, and when it does, it'll be one more door closed between you and him. After hanging up, Mara stood on the porch, shaking with rage and frustration. A year of building a new life, and Victor could still reach out from his prison cell to destabilize everything. I want to face him, she said suddenly. I want to go to the prison and look him in the eye and tell him he's lost, that he'll never control me again. That's a bad idea, Eli said immediately. Seeing him could trigger— I'm already triggered. Mara's voice rose. He's in my nightmares, in my fears, in every moment of doubt I have about whether I'm truly free. Maybe confronting him, seeing him powerless behind bars, would finally break his hold on me. Sarah touched Mara's shoulder gently. Or maybe it would give him exactly what he wants: your attention, your emotional energy, proof that he still matters to you. The words hit Mara like cold water. Sarah was right. Going to Victor, even to tell him he'd lost, would be giving him a victory. The ultimate revenge wasn't confrontation. It was indifference, living well, moving forward without him as a reference point. You're right, Mara said, deflating. God, you're right. I want this to be over. It is over, Eli said firmly. The legal process has to play out, but your part in Victor's story is done. You're writing new chapters now, and he's not in them. The next morning, Mara woke to her phone ringing. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Mara Lane, a woman's voice, professional but warm. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Santos. I'm a psychologist specializing in trauma recovery, and I've been following your program's work. I'd like to discuss a partnership opportunity. Over the next hour, Dr. Santos explained her proposal. She ran a trauma research institute in Santa Fe and wanted to study the Quiet Hands program's methods, document its outcomes, and develop a replicable model that could be implemented nationally. Your program is showing remarkable success rates, Dr. Santos said. Participants report significantly lower PTSD symptoms, higher employment rates, and better long-term stability than traditional shelter models. I believe what you're doing could revolutionize how we approach domestic violence recovery. You want to study us like lab rats, Mara said, skeptical. I want to amplify what you're doing, Dr. Santos corrected. Turn your local success into a national blueprint. Imagine Quiet Hands programs in every state, helping thousands instead of dozens. The possibility was dizzying and terrifying in equal measure. Mara agreed to a meeting, then immediately called an emergency board session with Eli, Patricia, Sheriff Calder, and Doc Morrison. They gathered at the ranch that afternoon, crowding around Eli's kitchen table to discuss the opportunity. The debate was immediate and intense. It's a chance to expand our impact exponentially, Patricia argued. We'd be foolish not to pursue it. But at what cost? Sheriff Calder countered. Researchers, publicity, scrutiny. It could change the program's fundamental nature. Participants come here because it's safe and private. National attention threatens that. Doc Morrison leaned back in his chair, considering. We could set boundaries, participate in research, but maintain participant anonymity, control how information is used. The bigger question, Eli said, looking at Mara, is whether you're ready for that level of exposure. Your story would become public in a different way, not just local news, but academic papers, conference presentations, maybe even congressional testimony about domestic violence policy. Mara's first instinct was to refuse, to keep the program small and manageable and safe. But then she thought about Rosa's tearful testimony, about Rebecca Torres apologizing for staying silent, about all the women and men still trapped in situations like hers had been. How many people did we help this year? She asked. Patricia consulted her notes. 43 direct participants plus their children, another 32 minors who received services. 75 people, Mara said. In 1 year, we helped 75 people. If we could replicate this program, we could help thousands, tens of thousands. She looked around the table. How can I say no to that because I'm afraid of attention? Attention isn't the same as safety, Eli warned. Going national means opposition from people who don't want to acknowledge domestic violence, who think we're undermining family values or exaggerating the problem. Let them come, Mara said, surprising herself with her vehemence. I've faced worse than critics. I've faced a man who tried to kill me and I survived. I can survive people who don't like what I have to say." The vote was unanimous. They would partner with Dr. Santos with strict protocols to protect participant privacy and program integrity. That night, alone in her house, Mara allowed herself to imagine the possibility Quiet Hands programs across the country, a network of survivors helping survivors' communities, transformed from enablers to allies. It was audacious, maybe impossible, but then again, so had been surviving Victor. The work of partnering with Dr. Santos began immediately. Research assistants arrived to document program methods, interview participants who consented, and analyze outcomes. James Whitmore's article published in the Albuquerque Journal, a sympathetic piece that highlighted the program's success without sensationalizing Mara's story. But with visibility came scrutiny. Anonymous letters arrived at the ranch, some supportive, others vicious. One called Mara a home-wrecking whore who destroyed a good man. Another suggested she was running a scam to extract money from bleeding hearts. A particularly disturbing one included graphic descriptions of what the writer would like to do to her. Sheriff Calder traced the threatening letters back to a men's rights forum online, where Victor had become a cause célèbre, a supposedly wronged husband destroyed by a vindictive wife and a biased justice system. The forum members were using Mara's story to fuel their own grievances, painting Victor as a martyr and Mara as everything wrong with modern women. "We're monitoring the forum," Sheriff Calder explained, showing Mara printouts of the most concerning posts. "Most of it's just keyboard warriors venting, but some of these guys—" She pointed to one post that detailed Mara's daily routine with unsettling accuracy. "Some of them might actually be dangerous." Security became tighter at the ranch. Cameras were installed, visitor protocols established, background checks required for all new volunteers. The openness that had defined the program's early days gave way to necessary caution. Mara hated that even in trying to help others, she'd become a target again, hated that Victor's poison continued spreading even from behind bars. But she refused to stop. The work refused to let anonymous cowards dictate her choices. 2 months into the research partnership, Dr. Santos invited Mara to present at a national conference on trauma-informed care in Denver. It would be Mara's first public appearance beyond local media, her first time speaking to an audience of professionals who would scrutinize every word. "I don't know if I can do this," Mara confessed to Eli the night before she was supposed to leave. "What if I freeze up there? What if I say something wrong and it damages the program's credibility?" "Then you'll be human," Eli replied. "These people aren't expecting perfection. They're expecting authenticity. You've lived what you're teaching. That's more valuable than any polished presentation." Sarah, who'd become increasingly involved in the program, offered to accompany Mara to Denver for moral support. The gesture touched Mara deeply. Sarah had her own trauma to process, her own recovery to navigate, yet she was willing to step into the spotlight to support someone else's healing. The conference was overwhelming, hundreds of therapists, researchers, and advocates filling a massive hotel ballroom. Mara's presentation was scheduled for the second day, giving her time to attend other sessions and understand the landscape she was entering. She listened to presentations on neurobiology of trauma, evidence-based interventions, policy recommendations. The language was academic, clinical, often divorced from the messy reality of actually surviving abuse. When her turn came, Mara decided to abandon the PowerPoint slides Dr. Santos had helped her prepare. Instead, she told her story, not the sanitized version she'd given to reporters, but the real one, the shame of being found naked in the desert, the terror of not knowing if help meant safety or more danger, the long road from victim to survivor to advocate. She talked about Eli's shirt covering her shoulders, about the community that eventually chose to stand with her, about the participants who'd found their voices through the program. "Trauma recovery isn't a protocol," she said, gripping the podium to steady herself. "It's not a 12-week program or a series of exercises. It's messy and non-linear, and sometimes you take 10 steps back for every step forward. The Quiet Hands program works not because we follow best practices, though we do, but because we treat participants as whole humans, not broken objects to be fixed. The silence in the room was absolute. Then someone started clapping, and the applause built until the entire ballroom was on its feet. After the presentation, Mara was mobbed by people wanting to know more, to bring the model to their communities, to share their own stories of survival and recovery. One woman, a therapist from Chicago, gripped Mara's hands tightly. 20 years ago, I was you, she said, tears streaming down her face. Hiding, broken, certain I'd never be anything more than what he made me. Now I help others heal, and I need them to know it's possible. Thank you for showing me that survival is just the beginning. Flying back to New Mexico, Mara felt different. Not healed, she was beginning to understand that healing wasn't a destination, but a practice, but purposeful in a way she'd never experienced. Her pain had become a tool, her survival a blueprint, her story a bridge for others to cross toward safety. But returning to Clearwater brought her crashing back to earth. Waiting in her mailbox was an official notice. Victor's appeal had been granted a hearing. His lawyers had convinced a judge that there were legitimate questions about trial bias that warranted review. It doesn't mean he'll win, Patricia said when Mara called, voice shaking. It just means they'll review the trial record. The evidence is still overwhelming. But yes, you'll likely have to testify again, relive it all again. Mara hung up and screamed a raw, primal sound that startled the birds from nearby trees. She'd done everything right. She'd built a new life, helped dozens of others, turned her tragedy into purpose. And still, Victor could reach out and drag her back into his orbit. Eli found her an hour later sitting in her dry garden with dirt under her fingernails from yanking weeds with savage intensity. He sat beside her without speaking, just present, just there. I'm so tired, Mara whispered finally. Tired of fighting, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of being Mara Lane, the survivor, instead of just Mara Lane. Who is just Mara Lane? Eli asked gently. When you're not surviving, not advocating, not building programs, who are you? The question stopped her cold. She genuinely didn't know. Every aspect of her identity had been defined by Victor, first as his victim, then as his opponent, now as someone helping others escape what she'd endured. Without that framework, who was she? I don't know, she admitted. I've been someone's wife, someone's victim, someone's inspiration, but just me, I have no idea. Then maybe that's the next step, Eli suggested. Not fighting Victor or building programs or helping others, just figuring out who Mara is when no one's watching, when there's no crisis to manage, when you're just a person existing in the world. The idea was both terrifying and liberating. That night, Mara did something she hadn't done in years. She went out. Not to a program event or a legal meeting or a fundraiser, but to a small bar in Clearwater where a local band played country music and people danced and drank and laughed. She sat at the bar nursing a beer, watching people be normal, be happy, be unburdened by trauma and purpose. A man asked her to dance, not hitting on her, just friendly, and after a moment's hesitation she accepted. The music was simple, the steps easy, and for 3 minutes Mara was just a woman dancing with a stranger who knew nothing about her story. It was the most normal she'd felt in years, and when the song ended she thanked him and returned to her seat with something that felt dangerously close to joy. Walking home that night under a sky full of stars, Mara realized something crucial: she could be both. She could be the advocate who helped others and the woman who danced to country music. She could carry her trauma and still find moments of lightness. She could honor what she'd survived without letting it consume her entire identity. The appeal hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Mara made a decision. She would stop letting Victor's legal maneuvering dictate her emotional state. She would testify if required, would face him if necessary, but she wouldn't spend the interim in fear and anticipation. Instead, she lived. She painted. She laughed with Sarah and Eli over dinner. She trained new program volunteers. She went dancing again. She started writing a book about her experience, not for publication necessarily, but for herself to process and understand and reclaim her narrative. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to feel like a person rather than a walking testimony to survival. The night before the hearing, Mara didn't have nightmares. She slept deeply and woke refreshed, ready to face whatever came next. Because she'd finally understood something essential. Victor could appeal 100 times, could drag her through 1,000 courtrooms, could try to rewrite history with lies and manipulation, but he couldn't touch who she'd become. That belonged to her alone. The courthouse in Albuquerque was different from the one in Clearwater, imposing glass and steel instead of weathered brick, the kind of building designed to remind people that justice operated on a scale beyond individual stories. Mara stood on the steps with Patricia, watching early morning commuters stream past, people whose biggest concern was probably traffic or coffee orders, not facing down the man who'd tried to kill them. "You ready?" Patricia asked, adjusting her briefcase. "No," Mara said honestly, "but I'm here anyway." Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators, journalists, law students, advocates who'd followed the case, and somewhere in the mix, Victor's family members who still believed their son was the wronged party. Mara spotted Victor's mother in the third row, her face carved from the same stone as her son's pride, radiating blame toward Mara like heat from a furnace. Then the bailiff brought Victor in, and Mara's breath caught despite her preparation. He looked smaller, somehow diminished by 18 months in prison orange, his shoulders hunched in a way they'd never been when he'd had power over her. But his eyes, those were the same, filled with the same calculating malice that had terrorized her for 3 years. Their gazes locked across the courtroom, and for a moment Mara felt herself shrinking, felt the old fear rising like bile in her throat. But then Eli's hand found hers. He'd insisted on coming despite the 5-hour drive, and the fear receded enough for her to breathe. Victor's lawyer stood first, a slick man in his 40s, named Douglas Crane, who specialized in appeals and had a reputation for finding technicalities where others saw airtight cases. He began by arguing that the original trial had been irreparably tainted by media coverage that portrayed Victor as a monster before the jury ever heard evidence. "The community had already convicted my client in the court of public opinion," Crane said, gesturing dramatically. "How could any jury in Clearwater remain impartial when the alleged victim had become a local hero, when the sheriff had publicly supported her narrative, when the very fabric of the town had turned against Mr. Lane?" Patricia stood smoothly. "The defense had the opportunity to request a change of venue and declined. They cannot now claim prejudice they actively chose not to avoid." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Harriet Blackwell, made a note. "Continue, Mr. Crane." "Furthermore, Your Honor, crucial evidence was excluded: character witnesses who could testify to my client's good nature, to Mrs. Lane's history of dramatic exaggeration, to the possibility that her injuries were self-inflicted for attention." Mara's fingernails dug into her palms. Self-inflicted. As if she'd broken her own arm, given herself fingerprint bruises, created an entire architecture of abuse for the drama of it. The excluded witnesses were deemed not credible by the trial judge, Patricia countered. 2 had criminal records for perjury. 1 was Victor Lane's cousin, who admitted under oath he'd never actually witnessed the marriage, and the 4th recanted his statement entirely. Judge Blackwell's expression suggested she'd already reviewed this ground and found it wanting, but she let Crane continue. He moved through a litany of supposed errors and biases, each more desperate than the last, building toward what Mara knew was coming: the request to hear new testimony, to let Victor tell his version again. "My client deserves the opportunity to present evidence that has come to light since the trial," Crane said. evidence that fundamentally changes the narrative of what occurred. What evidence? Judge Blackwell asked, her skepticism evident. Crane produced a document with theatrical flourish, a sworn affidavit from Dr. Gerald Hoffman, a psychologist who evaluated Mrs. Lane after the incident. He believes she exhibits signs of borderline personality disorder and histrionic tendencies, conditions that could explain her need for attention and her willingness to fabricate abuse allegations. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Mara felt the blood drain from her face. She'd never been evaluated by anyone named Hoffman, had never heard the name before this moment. Patricia was on her feet instantly. Your Honor, this is ambush testimony. We've received no notice of this witness, no opportunity to review his credentials or methodology. I move to exclude. Dr. Hoffman evaluated Mrs. Lane remotely. Crane interrupted smoothly. Based on publicly available interviews, court testimony, and behavioral patterns documented in the trial record, his analysis suggests garbage. Patricia snapped, her professional composure cracking. You cannot diagnose someone you've never met, never interviewed, never examined. This is junk science designed to smear the victim. Judge Blackwell held up a hand. I'll review Dr. Hoffman's credentials and methodology in chambers. For now, let's hear from Mrs. Lane herself. Mrs. Lane, please take the stand. Mara's legs were unsteady as she walked to the witness box. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat facing the courtroom with Victor's eyes boring into her like drills. Patricia started with gentle questions, walking Mara through her testimony from the original trial. The escalating abuse the day she fled Eli's intervention, Victor's attempted murder. It was familiar ground, painful but manageable. Then Crane stood for cross-examination, and Mara braced herself. Miss Lane, isn't it true that you initiated contact with Eli Hart before leaving your husband? Crane's voice was smooth, conversational, the tone of someone asking about the weather. No, I'd never met him before that day. Really? Because Mr. Hart's phone records show a call from your number 3 weeks before the incident. Mara's mind raced. That's impossible. I never... Then she remembered. Wait, I called about a horse. Victor wanted to buy a horse, and someone said Eli Hart might have one for sale. I left a message and he never called back. That's the only contact we ever had before he found me. A convenient explanation. Or perhaps you were planning your escape even then, establishing a relationship with a lonely older man who might provide shelter and believe your stories. Objection, Patricia called. Counsel is testifying, not questioning. Sustained. Mr. Crane, ask questions, don't make speeches. But the damage was done. Crane had planted doubt, suggested premeditation, implied calculation where there had been only desperate survival. He continued in this vein, twisting every aspect of Mara's story, suggesting she'd manipulated Eli, exaggerated injuries, orchestrated the confrontation that led to Victor's arrest. And isn't it true, Mrs. Lane, that you benefit financially from your ex-husband's incarceration, the house, the assets, the divorce settlement, all dependent on him being in prison? I benefit from being alive, Mara said, her voice shaking but clear. Everything else is just details. Details like the successful program you run, which has received considerable funding based on your story of surviving abuse. Details like the book deal you're negotiating, the speaking fees you've collected. You've built quite an empire on the foundation of calling my client a monster. Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. I built a program to help people who were suffering like I suffered. The money goes to the program, not to me. And if speaking my truth makes Victor look like a monster, maybe that's because he acted like one. No further questions, Crane said, looking satisfied. The judge called a recess, and Mara practically fell into Patricia's arms in the hallway. He made it sound like I planned everything, like I used Eli, like I'm some kind of con artist. He's desperate, Patricia said firmly. That phone call about a horse, that's nothing. the financial benefit. You were entitled to marital assets regardless of his criminal conviction, and that psychologist who never met you, Judge Blackwell, will throw that out. Crane's throwing everything at the wall, hoping something sticks. But Mara couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that doubt had been introduced where certainty had existed, that Victor's lies might find purchase after all. When court reconvened, the prosecutor who'd originally tried the case took the stand to defend the integrity of the trial. She methodically dismantled each of Crane's arguments, pointing to the overwhelming physical evidence, the multiple witnesses, the video of Victor pulling a gun. Then Judge Blackwell made her ruling on Dr. Hoffman's testimony. "I've reviewed Dr. Hoffman's credentials and his so-called evaluation," she said, her voice cold with disapproval. "This court does not recognize remote psychological diagnoses based on media appearances and court transcripts. Dr. Hoffman will not be testifying, and his affidavit is stricken from the record. Mr. Crane, if this is the quality of new evidence you're presenting, you're wasting this court's time." Relief flooded through Mara, but it was short-lived. Crane had one more card to play. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Victor Lane to testify." The request sent a ripple through the courtroom. Victor hadn't testified at the original trial, exercising his Fifth Amendment right, but now, with nothing left to lose, he was willing to speak. Victor took the stand with the careful dignity of a man wrongly accused, his prison orange somehow making him look like a martyr rather than a criminal. Under Crane's questioning, he painted a picture of a troubled marriage with a mentally unstable wife, of his attempts to get her help, of her affair with Eli that drove him to desperation. "I loved her," Victor said, his voice breaking convincingly. "I just wanted her to get help, to stop making up stories for attention. When I saw her with him that night, when I realized she'd chosen him over me, I snapped. I'm not proud of pulling that gun, but I wasn't trying to kill anyone. I just wanted her to listen, to come home, to get the help she needed." It was a masterful performance, and Mara could see some spectators nodding, could feel the narrative shifting despite all evidence to the contrary. Then Patricia stood for cross-examination, and her first question cut through Victor's act like a scalpel. "Mr. Lane, you testified you wanted your wife to get help. What kind of help specifically?" Victor blinked, thrown by the simple question. "Psychological help. She needed therapy." "Did you ever arrange therapy for her? Make an appointment, find a therapist, offer to pay for treatment?" She wouldn't have gone. She was in denial about her problems." "So you never actually tried to get her professional help, despite believing she desperately needed it? She wouldn't have listened. Yes or no, Mr. Lane? Did you ever arrange psychological care for your wife?" "No." Patricia nodded slowly. "Let's talk about the night you pulled a gun on Mrs. Lane. You testified you snapped when you saw her with Eli Hart, but witnesses testified you arrived with the gun already loaded and ready. Had you been carrying that gun for a while?" It was for protection. Your ranch is 6 miles from Eli Hart's property. Why did you need a loaded gun to drive to his ranch?" Victor's composure was cracking. "I didn't know what I'd find." "You knew exactly what you'd find, your wife safe with people protecting her from you. And you brought a gun specifically to threaten her back into submission, didn't you?" "No, I brought it because I thought she might be in danger." "From whom?" "The sheriff who was there, the dozen community members, or from yourself, Mr. Lane." "Objection." Crane stood. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "I'm establishing premeditation," Patricia shot back. "Your Honor, Mr. Lane's claim that he snapped is contradicted by his deliberate actions, driving to the location, bringing a loaded weapon, making threats. This wasn't a momentary loss of control. It was calculated intimidation." Judge Blackwell nodded. "Overruled. Continue, Ms. Chen." Patricia turned back to Victor, and Mara saw something she'd never seen before. Victor genuinely afraid. Not of physical harm, but of being exposed, of having his carefully constructed lies demolished in public. Mr. Lane, you broke your wife's arm 18 months before she left you. How did that happen? She fell. You drove her to a clinic in Roswell 2 hours away for treatment. Why not the local hospital? Victor's jaw worked. I don't remember. Maybe we were already in Roswell. The medical records show you arrived at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Does that sound like you just happened to be in Roswell, or does it sound like you deliberately sought treatment far from home where people wouldn't ask questions? I don't. And the bruises documented in Dr. Morrison's report, the ones with fingerprint patterns matching your hand size, how did those occur? She bruises easily. Mr. Lane, at what point do you take responsibility for putting your hands on your wife with enough force to leave bruises? At what point do you stop lying and admit what you did? Victor's face went red, then white, the same progression Mara had seen 100 times before. He exploded into violence. But here in court, with guards present and judge watching, he couldn't explode. He could only sit there trapped by his own testimony, his lies collapsing under the weight of evidence. I was trying to help her, he finally said, voice small. Everything I did was trying to help her. Help her by breaking her arm, help her by choking her unconscious, help her by threatening to kill her in front of witnesses. Patricia's voice was sharp as broken glass. Mr. Lane, the only person you were helping was yourself, helping yourself to control, to power, to possession of another human being. Objection! Crane was on his feet again. Your Honor, this is argumentative. Sustained. Ms. Chen, do you have any actual questions? Patricia looked at Victor for a long moment, and Mara saw something pass between them, the lawyer's contempt meeting the abuser's impotent rage. No, Your Honor, this witness has already revealed everything we need to know. The hearing concluded with closing arguments. Crane made a last desperate appeal to doubt, to the possibility of misunderstanding, to the tragedy of a man destroyed by false accusations. Patricia's rebuttal was brief and devastating. Your Honor, this appeal is not about justice. It's about a convicted criminal trying to escape consequences through the same manipulation and lies he used to control his victim for 3 years. The evidence was overwhelming at trial. It remains overwhelming now. The only thing that's changed is Mr. Lane's desperation. I urge you to deny this appeal and let Mrs. Lane finally move forward with her life. Judge Blackwell took less than an hour to deliberate. When she returned, her expression was set in lines of granite. I've reviewed the trial record, considered the arguments presented today, and evaluated the so-called new evidence. This court finds no merit to the appeal. The original trial was conducted fairly. The evidence was overwhelming and the verdict was just. Mr. Lane's conviction stands. Appeal denied. The gavel fell, and with it the last thread connecting Mara to Victor's legal grip on her life. She felt Eli's hand squeeze hers, felt Patricia's arm around her shoulders, felt the weight of 3 years of terror finally completely lifting. Victor's face contorted with rage as guards led him away. He shouted something at Mara, but she didn't hear the words. They didn't matter anymore. Nothing he said could touch her now. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered with questions, but Mara had only one statement prepared. Today, justice was reaffirmed. Not just for me, but for every survivor who's been told they're lying, exaggerating, or seeking attention. Abuse is real. Recovery is possible, and abusers must be held accountable. That's all I have to say. She walked away from the cameras, from the courthouse, from the last legal battle with Victor Lane, and felt something she'd barely dared to imagine: freedom. True, complete, unassailable freedom. The drive back to Clearwater was quiet, each of them processing in their own way. As the familiar landscape emerged from the twilight, the mesas and arroyos and endless sky, Mara felt herself settling into a truth she'd been resisting. She was home, not the house she'd shared with Victor, not even her own small property, but Clearwater itself had become home in a way she'd never expected. The town that had first condemned her had eventually stood with her, and that transformation was something worth staying for. What's next? Eli asked as they pulled into the ranch. The question he always asked, but this time with different weight. I want to expand the program, Mara said. Not just replicate it nationally, but deepen it here. Add long-term housing, job placement, education partnerships. I want Clearwater to be a model for what a community can do when it chooses to protect instead of punish survivors. That's a big vision. I've got time now, all the time that used to be consumed by fear and legal battles and looking over my shoulder. Might as well use it for something good. Over the next months, Mara threw herself into expansion plans with the focused energy of someone who'd spent too long in survival mode and was hungry for purpose. The Quiet Hands program doubled its residential capacity, partnered with the local community college for vocational training, and established a job placement network with local businesses. But Mara also made space for the person she was beyond the advocate. She joined a painting class, reconnected with an old friend from before Victor started hiking the desert trails, just for the joy of movement. She went on a few dates, awkward, fumbling attempts at normalcy that mostly ended in friendly goodbyes, but the trying felt important. And she maintained her friendship with Eli, the man who'd saved her life, and asked nothing in return. They fell into an easy rhythm, dinners shared on the ranch porch, early morning coffee before the day's chaos began, quiet evenings, where comfortable silence said more than words ever could. You ever think about what comes next for you? Mara asked him one evening 6 months after the appeal hearing. They were watching another desert sunset, the sky ablaze with color. I'm doing what comes next, Eli replied. The program, the ranch, helping where I can. That's enough. But Sarah's back in your life, the program's stable. You could sell the ranch, travel, do all the things you put on hold when you were waiting for your daughter to come home. Eli considered this. I could, but sitting here watching the sunset with someone I care about, knowing the work we're doing matters, I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be. The words hung between them, gentle and significant. Mara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the rancher who'd saved her, but the man who'd walked beside her through the hardest journey of her life and never once expected gratitude or reward. I care about you too, she said quietly. More than I've been willing to admit, because I was afraid of replacing one dependence with another. But what I feel for you isn't need, it's respect, gratitude, maybe even love, though I'm still learning what healthy love looks like. Eli smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. We've got time to figure it out. No rush, no pressure, just two people who've been through hell and came out the other side, maybe finding something good together. It wasn't a declaration or a proposal, just an acknowledgement of possibility. And for Mara, possibility was enough. A year after the appeal hearing, the Quiet Hands program hosted its 2nd anniversary celebration. The ranch was transformed, new buildings housing classrooms and residential units, gardens planted and tended by participants, a sense of permanence and hope radiating from every corner. Dr. Santos attended, bringing news that 5 other communities were implementing the Quiet Hands model with promising early results. James Whitmore came to cover the event, his article having sparked national interest in community-based recovery programs. Even Sheriff Calder brought her daughter, who'd become one of the program's most dedicated volunteers. As Mara stood before the assembled crowd, participants, volunteers, community members, and supporters from across the state, she felt the full weight of what they'd built together. 2 years ago, she began, I was hiding in the desert, broken and terrified, certain my life was over. A man named Eli Hart found me and offered something simple but profound, a shirt to cover my shame, and a choice about what came next. That choice led to more choices, each one building on the last, until survival became recovery and recovery became purpose. She paused, looking across the faces that had become familiar, beloved. This program exists because one community decided to change, to look at abuse not as a private matter, but as a collective responsibility, to stand with survivors instead of questioning them, to build systems of support instead of walls of silence. Mara's voice strengthened. But we're not done. Every day someone is suffering what I suffered. Every day someone is hiding, afraid to speak, certain no one will believe them. Our job, all of our jobs, is to make sure that when they find the courage to speak, there's someone ready to listen, to believe, to help. The applause was thunderous, but Mara barely heard it. She was looking at the faces of participants who'd found safety here, at Eli standing to the side with quiet pride, at Sarah laughing with a group of volunteers, at the community that had transformed itself from enabler to ally. After the speeches and celebrations wound down, Mara found herself alone on the porch, where Eli had first offered her water and safety and choice. The stars were emerging, countless points of light in the vast darkness, each one distinct and necessary. Eli joined her, carrying 2 glasses of wine. Quite a day, quite a journey, Mara corrected, accepting the glass. Any regrets? Mara thought about the question seriously. About staying, about building this, no. But I regret the years I lost to Victor, the person I might have been if I'd never met him. I regret that other people are still suffering what I suffered. You can't save everyone. No, but I can save someone. And someone can save someone else. And slowly we change the world. She looked at Eli. You taught me that. One person choosing to help can start a revolution. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen. 2 survivors who'd found purpose in each other's company and strength in each other's survival. Mara thought about the woman she'd been, the terrified victim hiding in the scrub brush, begging not to be seen. That woman still existed inside her, would always exist, as a reminder of where she'd been. But she was no longer defined by that moment. She was defined by every moment after every choice to speak, instead of hide, to stand, instead of cower, to build, instead of break. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere in the residential building, a participant was probably settling into sleep, feeling safe, maybe for the first time in years. Somewhere else, another person was gathering courage to leave their abuser, to seek help, to choose survival. And here, on this porch, where her new life had begun with a borrowed shirt and a promise of safety, Mara Lane stood watching the stars and feeling something she'd once thought impossible: hope for tomorrow, peace with today, and gratitude for the journey that had brought her home. Thank you, she said to Eli, the words encompassing everything: the rescue, the support, the partnership, the friendship, the love that was growing between them in its own time and way. Thank you, he replied, and she knew he meant the same, for giving his life purpose again, for letting him be the man he'd failed to be for his daughter, for building something that would outlast them both. The program would continue growing, helping hundreds, and eventually thousands. Mara would keep speaking, keep advocating, keep showing others that survival was just the beginning. Eli would remain her partner in all of it, the steady presence that asked nothing and gave everything. But for now, in this moment, they simply stood together watching the stars emerge, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage. 2 survivors who'd learned that sometimes love was a shelter, sometimes it was courage, and sometimes it was a hand that refused to let you fall. The desert night settled around them, vast and peaceful and full of promise, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara Lane looked toward tomorrow, not with fear, but with anticipation. She was free, she was whole, she was home, and that finally was enough.